Welcome, everybody. And today we have the second masterclass with Looby Macnamara. My name is Sylvia, and I am from Gaia Education. Gaia Education, as you know, is an organization that covers many courses, both online and in person. And we are very proud to launch these masterclasses and to receive today very experienced permaculturist and author of many books, and probably the first person in the permaculture movement to touch in the subject of people and permaculture. And not just because of the book that was launched in 2012, I think, but also because Looby has been, all these years, has been both exploring and integrating that is, the knowledge from that exploration into why sometimes when we have all the knowledge in the world about how to change things, why the things still don't work. And that goes back to culture and to Looby's latest book, Cultural Emergence. So I'm going to introduce here Looby. Looby, you can tell a little bit more about yourself and how you got into permaculture and why on earth, from all the things, you decided to get into the most difficult piece, which is people, how to work with people and patterns within communities and within ourselves.
Well, I think I probably agree with you that the people side of things is the most challenging, and it is also the place maybe of most leverage and most potential for change, most opportunity, because it's so challenging. And because it is generally the limits that stop us with the earth care solutions is actually the people side of things, and on small scales all the way up to international politics. And with permaculture, we like to flip limits. We turn them around. If there's a limit, it's like, okay, that's actually our design opportunity. If it's a limit, it's our design opportunity. So if people are our greatest limit, they're also our greatest design opportunity as well. So so that's that's where it came from. I think when I first came to permaculture back in 1998 and then 1999, I did my permaculture design course. When I did that course, I was just so invigorated and enthused by the learning environment I was in. It was just this creative, fertile, collaborative, fun, exuberant, solutions focused environment that I just really loved. So I fell in love with that learning environment, and that's what led me to go on to put on my long-term goals and visions. Yes, I'd like to teach permaculture. And then when I started teaching permaculture after a few years, I realized that some people really understood that the people side was the limit and we needed to pay attention. Mm-hmm. But there were still quite a few people that didn't understand that. They were just like, well, no, I just want to know how to garden and plant trees. And if I know that, then it, I can do permaculture and that's fine. And it's like, yes, but there's this other opportunity. And what I realized when I was in our realized that actually in the permaculture movement, there were a lot of people who had resonance with the permaculture tools, the principles and the design in their lives way beyond the garden, and that the influence of permaculture in their lifestyles, in their livelihoods, in their relationships, in their inner landscape was actually really quite extensive and all encompassing of their life. And so while I was the first person to write the book, actually I wasn't the first person to think it and feel it. There was already that, that within the permaculture community, those stories of, well, actually that, permaculture entirely changed my perspective. And from going down this route, it totally took me off on a different route. And so what I did was bring those stories out and to bring the tips and the tools and the methods out, and then give them a platform for them to then extend, and for that dialogue to happen around the people care ethic. Because as it's been said before, we know how to do the earth care solutions. We could radically transform the ecosystem for the better, transform and protect and restore the ecosystems on this planet with the knowledge and the skills and the tools and the resources that we have available to us right now. And that was true 20 years ago even, and it's only getting more true. But what we still don't have is the political will to do that, the cultural values and the cultural priorities that make us want to do that. So we're still missing that. We don't have the sense of purpose as individuals and collectively to do that. We are still chasing metrics of economic growth and and money, that is leading us away from those earth care solutions. So it's still our minds and our perspectives and our cultural values that play out in our media, that play out in our business, that play out in our politics, international politics. Those are the limits. And then even on an individual level, it's my own sense of valuing, do I care for my garden and grow some vegetables, which I have to put time and energy into doing, or do I just go and get a job and then work and then go and buy the vegetables for much cheaper, wrapped in plastic, that have come from the other side of the world, but it's much cheaper. So so those are the sort of some of the elements of the limits that we're facing as people.
It's interesting, and in some part of your book, I don't remember exactly where, I found this idea that most of the challenges, if not all the challenges that we are experiencing right now, they all boil down to culture. They all come from culture. So I wanted to see if you can explain a little bit more. What is culture? I mean, what is culture? We seem to know what is culture, and it's that thing that we don't necessarily see. It's like we are a fish, and the water there is around. That's culture. But if you can define a little bit more, and from there to explain what is emergence, and what is that concept of cultural emergence that you so well explained in your book, and that has, for me, has been a real change in my mind of, there are some patterns emerging out there. There are things that are happening, and I can actually do something about that. Even if I cannot change or predict the future, there are many other things that I can do. So could you explain a little bit more what is culture from that perspective, and how that links to cultural emergence?
Yeah, so culture is this word that we use all the time, and no one really thinks twice about using the word, or to say, well, you've just said the word culture, Sylvia. What do you mean by that? Because probably what you think you mean by the word culture is completely different to what I think. Some people use the word culture to synonymously with a country, or culture as in like opera, or it could be anything in between. So and it's interesting. It's one of those words that has quite a similar root in many different languages, and you're being a multilinguist, probably know much more about that than me. Whereas we'll come to the word emergence, which is quite challenging for other languages, I think. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. I mean, emergence, for example, has the same root in Spanish, same as culture. They're very similar to English. Probably, I don't know what is the exact root. But you're right that the concept that people have about what is culture is a little bit different from, depending on what is the context of the conversation. So in the context that you bring about in your book and your courses, which is the changing of the patterns, both inside of ourselves and, inside the communities, maybe, defining that, how culture and emergence, come together, and why that concept is so important to make changes in ourselves, in our groups and communities, and eventually in, the future that we all want and deserve.
So my working definition of culture is a complex web of seen and unseen patterns of thinking, behaving, interacting, feeling. So this complex web, we actually all have our own personal complex web, a unique complex web of patterns. And I'm sure we'll all be aware that our complex web of patterns is very different to our partners or spouses or our housemates or our children's. It's like, oh, you've got a completely different web of patterns. So that's one of the first things that I think is really important for us to understand, because we tend to think of culture as this thing that is out there. Culture is out there, it's immovable, it's big, it's I can't do anything about it, it's just big and out there. So when we start to think, actually, I have my own complex web of patterns, I have my own personal culture, then we immediately see that we have some responsibility and some agency for change of our personal culture, that we can interact with that web of patterns, and we can decide to exercise in the morning, or we can decide to make a gratitude pattern in our life, to bring in that pattern of thinking into our lives that will then connect with other patterns. So if we start a pattern of gratitude for ourselves, a thinking pattern, that will also affect our patterns of interacting and how we interact with those around us as well. So this is where there's the web of patterns, and when we start to move the web, then other things ripple out. And so we have this culture, and I think for many people listening, they maybe know about permaculture and know of it as this contraction first of permanent agriculture, and then it came permanent culture. And actually our agricultural systems are a mirror, a reflection of growth from our cultural patterns. So we talked about economic growth, and that's seen in our agricultural patterns as well, that there's more of an emphasis on quantity than quality. Would be like an unseen paradigm that is being operated through our agriculture. And so but I don't know, but the permanent culture gives us a sort of sense of this place in the future that we are trying to get to, and there is one particular culture that is the right culture, that when we get there, then all our problems are resolved. And I know that isn't quite the meaning, and that actually we mean permanent as in sustainable and long-lasting, i.e. it won't degrade the systems and decay. It will be regenerative in that sense and long-lasting. But what's come about in the last 5 years is my latest book, which is Cultural Emergence, and this is a way of, it came through an emergent process where this word culture and this word emergence came together, and it was recognizing it was actually the first line of a poem that I wrote about this cultural emergency calls for cultural emergence. It's like, this is what we need, is this breaking through of this emergency that is going on, that what's happening on the planet is a cultural emergency. So when we talk about climate change, it is a cultural emergency. It has technological and natural solutions to it, but there's many factors involved, but it stems from how we're operating on the planet, which is our culture, our cultures. And so the idea of cultural emergence is that we can use practices and principles that will help us direct that emergence, that will help us to break through and allow new growth and allow new things to come through, and that is actually a process. Yeah. So it's not this one destination, that is a process that will allow many cultures to live harmoniously together.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. And that's that, includes both a personal transformation and a community or group transformation that is continuously evolving, and adapting. Like you say, it's a process. It's not something that is guaranteed that it's going to be a certain way, at the end. But it's this whole process that happened. And that brings me back to something that you mentioned at the beginning when you were mentioning about the changes and the opportunities for each one of us to create changes, and the responsibility, when we recognize, when we are challenged and become awake of our own culture and what is happening in our own lives and in our relationships, and that is the agency that we have. And while we all have some sort of agency, there is also this connection of different ways of oppression and privilege that we all carry. And sometimes some of us have more privilege, which leads to more agency on creating change or in ourselves or in our communities, while in other people that is not really very balanced. So in your book you also speak about leveling privilege, and I really like that, because it's that opportunity, that gratitude that we can feel about the privilege that we do have, and how we can level privilege for those who may not have the same kind of privileges. Can you speak a little bit more about that and give an example of, how can somebody, and let's take a real scenario, if we are in a group of people who want to make changes, either in a local food garden or, in your neighborhood, anything, you want to create changes, and maybe you do have the time and maybe you have the option of, volunteering because you don't need the money and you can do certain things, but there are many people who may not. So for example, in a case like that, or any other cases that you have encountered in your, in your courses, in your explorations, can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so leveling privilege is one of the practices. So with the practices, they're things that we do regularly. So they become routines, they become habits, they become part of our complex web of patterns that is part of our own personal culture and then ripples out. So leveling privilege is one of them. And when I first was, working through this, it was... I first identified it as awareness of privilege. And then I realized that awareness isn't enough. It's just, it's not just enough to be aware. We need to do something about it. And this is where it became leveling privilege. So it's an active thing of how do we allow someone else to maybe take space, so that it's so that we think, maybe in the group, in the example you were using we were thinking that, who has that ability, that privilege to speak, to be part of that group, and yet, so it's like who can be there because of they have the privilege of their time, but maybe saying, well, who can't be here? Why can't they be here? Is it because the times we're open are sort of typical work times? Is it because they've got childcare issues? Can we open it up so that people can bring their children here with them? Is it a lack of transport to get to the place? What is it that's the barriers there? And to start really, thinking about that and providing people with opportunities to work through that, or maybe it's they don't feel safe in the space, or are they going to feel welcomed? And so having some opportunities to introduce people in small ways, small sort of steps there as well. And I think for a lot of us, for many of us, we're in that kind of middle band of privilege. It's, it's not that we haven't got any, and it's not that we're in that kind of, the billionaire status.
Intersectionality, right? Like, the intersection of many different things that apply to us. Yeah.
Yes, mm-hmm. and so some of them are really obvious about, our gender or race, but they're not. Some of them are not obvious at all. What was the background of our childhood? That doesn't necessarily come through. So it's really comes to a place of sort of listening and to a place of humility and gratitude as well. As you said, that gratitude can also then help us to feel grateful and to feel moved to help others have what we are feeling grateful for. And maybe if it's around freedom of speech, or which has many different levels as well, from literally being able to speak our minds, to just, do we feel comfortable speaking up in a group? Or, how can we do that? How can we open the space for other people to speak if they want to, and to, rather than speaking for them, to just open up their space and be like, oh, I noticed you look like you had something to say in this matter, and just allow to open up that space for someone to be heard.
And it's being, it's developing that awareness all the time, and being open to feedback, right? which is another principle from permaculture to, because we don't know what we don't know, right? So we're not fully aware of everything. That's why we need others to provide the feedback.
Absolutely, absolutely. And
Yeah.
just another thing to say on the leveling privilege is that often, or just to say, don't forget that actually money can be a useful way of leveling privilege. Where do we put our energy, whether that's our money, our time, our resources, our attention as well? Can we actually give our attention to the women's voices, women writers? Can we give our attention there?
Yeah. And yes, and that is actually one of the topics that we touched a lot in our social dimension. That's one of the courses of our program, the Design for Sustainability program that lasts 14 months. But people can take one course at a time. And actually, we have one starting on October 4 on social permaculture. We talk a lot about privilege and being aware of who we are and how we can work around the intersectionality of all the different things that create that influence in us, and we can influence also others. But going back to you and to cultural emergence, could you talk a little bit about the phases? Like, I when I encountered cultural emergence, I was already, from the work of Reconnects, and I think I commented this to you. And I then took your courses, and then finally, got your book. And there are so many things that cross, from the work of Reconnects and also from the art of mentoring. So I would like you to speak a little bit about, well, first the connection, because you have a lot of connections with those two approaches or movements and how that happened. And then maybe explain a little bit about the phases, the challenge and awake, and, so going through those and give an example of each.
Yeah, so the term cultural emergence emerged from a collaboration between myself and John Young, who is over in the States and is known for being part of the Wilderness Awareness, founder of the Wilderness Awareness School, and also the 8 Shields movement, and as you say, the art of mentoring. So those are all connected, and so we were invited to collaborate, and we were like, yeah, okay, and then we were like, well, what could emerge out of this? What would be the emergence part of it? So not just, I talk about people in permaculture, he talks about 8 Shields, that's the course. It's like from that word go, we sort of felt like there was something new coming through. And that was where the term cultural emergence came from. And John's work, when he looks at deep nature connection from Coyote's Guide to Nature Connection, he talks about core routines or practices that you do regularly, the core routines of nature connection, so like a sit spot or storytelling. And so we said, well, what would be the core routines, the practices of cultural emergence then? And then we also asked ourselves, because I'm a permaculturist, and as a permaculturist, we love principles. So we also said, well, what would be the principles of cultural emergence? So that's kind of where it came from. And so I'm still collaborating with him at the moment, and we're just started the Activating Cultural Emergence course online, and then we'll be going on to so that's the ACE course and the SEED course, which is Cultural Emergence Effective Design. So the SEED course. So those are the 2 courses that we've got coming up. It's so we still collaborate a lot and work through it. And then with the work that reconnects, that my journey with that started when I was writing People and Permaculture, actually, I was very much engaged with that. And then I did a facilitator training with Chris Johnston, who wrote Active Hope with Joanna Macy. And, I was very blessed to have Joanna Macy write, read People and Permaculture and write an endorsement for that. And I've had the fortune to meet her since. And so I have been very much engaged in the work that reconnects, and I can't really sort of like pull apart, which part is which, and it's been part of my pattern of thinking, part of the processes of the work, the reconnect, and the philosophy behind that there is, this potential for change, this potential for the great turning, and how can I be a part of that? That's really, been a very present question for me for the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the question for all of us, isn't it? Of how do we be a part of this great turning? And so you asked about the phases. So when we started mapping this out, we realized that there were these phases that when they come into balance, then we create more emergence. And the phases are challenge and awaken, move and invigorate, and nourish and empower. So with the challenge and awaken, it's like that sort of like that light bulb moment, the waking up, the sort of, it can feel like the nettle stings. It's like, okay, it's getting me going, but it can be quite challenging. And I feel that that's definitely been a phase that's been activated across the planet. In these COVID times that we've, and one of the practices is of the challenge and awaken phase is this awareness of culture, and that's definitely happened. That there were a lot of things that we just took for granted. Like none of us really thought too much about how close we stood next to each other, but suddenly those patterns were revealed. They went from unseen patterns to very seen and noticeable patterns. And so that's the challenge and awaken phase. Shall I share about the other phases as well?
Yeah, and I would like to see, for example, an example of what happens, because we had the tendency. I mean, there is a lot of sociology and psychology in your books, and in and in the approaches that you are presenting, and that's why I see so many similarities, not just with the work that reconnects and the art of mentoring, but also because these are not things that you created. These are things that you observed in the world happening, and you basically collected them. Like you say, like in permaculture, we like to observe patterns and kind of put things in order, right? So we have that intentional mind. That's the difference between something that is emerging by itself, with no guidance that we know, and something that we can start intentionally moving towards certain goal that we want. So going back to the phases, it's very easy to be stuck in one of these phases. If you're in the challenging and awaken part, yes, it shakes you, and it can be really even inspiring, both challenging and inspiring, to start new things. And also, like you say, to realize, wow, I didn't even know that. I didn't know how much I needed to be, around people and touch until COVID came. And then suddenly all the people, are away from me, right? And everything is in cameras, right? So things like that. So, but we can be stuck in those stages. Like, we can stay there for many, much longer than it should. And then it becomes a different thing. So it would be nice to talk about not just the phases, but also, what happens when you're stuck, in one of those phases.
Yeah, so there is the kind of sense of too much of any of these phases, and that could be different for between me and you. It's all very unique to ourselves, and depending on the time of the season and the time of day. So but like the challenge and awaken, if you end up with too much of it, it can feel too overwhelmed and overwhelming. And it's like when you hear the statistics coming at us all the time of the polar caps melting, and how many species have gone extinct today, and how many football pitches of the Amazon rainforest we've lost in the last, since we've been talking, etc., etc., etc. You can just keep on going, and at the first you might feel like, oh gosh, we've got to do something about it. But after a while, you either get so wound up and overwhelmed by it, or you become numb to it. And this, you'll be familiar with this with the work that reconnects, is that there is this collective numbing, that because it's like there's too much of the challenge and awaken, so we're actually like, okay, I'm going to block that out. I can't deal with it. I'm just going to be numb to it. So I'm not going to emotionally engage with any of these statistics. And that is part of the cultural issue of why we're not emotionally engaging with it. And so change isn't happening.
Yeah. But sometimes you want to produce that, like, with pattern disruption. So you want to bring something into your group or into your life on purpose, because you fall in the other side of being very complacent, like, oh, everything is fine, and and
yes. Yeah, exactly. And so you want to wake everyone up. You want to say, hey, do you know that there's this this island, I don't know the figures, but this huge island of plastic in the ocean. You want people to feel that and be shocked by that. Then you want to follow that up with the move and invigorate phase, and you want to say, hey, shall we do a campaign at our local shop for them to reduce the plastic? Shall we go and do a litter pick in at our local beach? Shall we, so it's then suddenly like you go from this awareness to, okay, well, I can move forward in this. I can move and invigorate. I can make a difference, a small difference, but I can show that I'm doing something, show to myself as well as other people that there is some way forward, there is some designing that we can do to make change in our lives. But then the other side of the move and invigorate, the too much of that, is that burnout. That like, well, I've been doing this project and 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 this project, and I haven't sat down to eat dinner with my family for 3 months. So then we hit burnout with too much of the move and invigorate. And then the third phase, the nourish and empower, as you say, if we have too much of that, we can kind of feel a bit too comfortable in where we're at, and just we become a little bit numb to other people's problems then.
Or judgmental, right? Like, like self-righteous, like, oh yes, I know all the answers, and look at me, I'm already on the other side.
We just need to, if everyone in the planet got up and meditated at 4:00 in the morning, followed by 2 hours of gardening and 3 hours of yoga, followed by green smoothies, and if we all just did that, it would all be fine.
That reminds me, there's a lot of what you mentioned actually in cultural emergence that relates to another one of the courses that we have, that is the worldview dimension, which is usually the last one in the full certificate. And one of the pieces of that, I mean, it's a lot of self-care, but also it's a lot of a change in consciousness about, what are our values, what is what we value, and that's the awareness of culture, right? And what is what we believe about ourselves and about the world. And but there's this other piece of engaged spirituality. So it's not just me meditating or me eating healthy, but how do I engage? And
Right.
that's the action part, in your yeah.
But yeah,
So
so it's beyond the individual, and recognizing that that there is some privilege involved in us being able to nourish and empower ourselves, and that we need to give out and help level privilege and give that opportunities to other people, and for us collectively to all have those opportunities for self-care and for nourishment.
Yeah. So we have a few more minutes to wrap up, and then we are going to go into questions, if there are questions, from those attending. And if you have to recommend, so the people watching us, maybe some of them may be students from our ecosystem restoration course that just started, or maybe just regular people outside who have not taken courses in Gaia education yet, but who are very interested in what you had to say. So if they have to do one little thing, one of the routines, what would you recommend them to start with? I know it's different from everybody. I know it's, we cannot just say, oh, everybody should go, and have a seated spot right away. But, well, could be, right? Could be one of the options. But what would you recommend? And particularly in these times that are so challenging, where everything is so uncertain, some places are open, some places are not. We can be closed, sometimes we are not, and there's all this uncertainty that keeps people very, very confused. So what would be one routine for that?
Well, I think I would actually choose kind of one from each of the phases, so that people can see what's missing in their life, or to give them a different lens if they are feeling too challenged and awoken, how to, or any of them, how to bring more balance in. And so with the challenge and awaken phase, I would say that the awareness of culture is really like the keystone routine there, to really start recognizing that you have your own personal culture, recognizing that we are in this time of cultural quicksand, where rules keep on changing and cultural norms keep on changing, and all of that, and to use that awareness of culture to be able to explore it in a curious way. Okay, so what's changing with culture here? What's changing in my personal culture? What are these patterns? Okay, what's if I've just changed my eating patterns, how has that started to affect my sleeping patterns? So starting to see this web of patterns and feel the connections there. So that would be the awareness of culture for the challenge and awaken phase. For the move and invigorate phase, this manifesting through design and action is the keystone routine there, and using the design web, which you can find on my website, thecultural-emergence.com, and that you can think about, so starting to design in small steps, so like really starting to be more effective, creating patterns of success for yourself. So if you've made a commitment to get up and go for a walk tomorrow, that you do that, and it's okay if it's a small walk, but you've done it. You said you'd do something and you've done it, and that you start to build trust in yourself that you can do what you commit to doing, and that can be on a really small scale, that then starts to build that effectiveness and to be able to create designs for yourself for future projects. And then for the Nourish and Empower phase, it's about connection practices. So it can be about finding a sit spot. So just finding somewhere out in nature, but it can be on your balcony, it could be in a local park, it could be about consciously looking out of the window at the sky if you can't leave the house. So to have some way where you are connecting with the more than human world in a bigger connecting it with that bigger picture and just observing. And I find actually the practice of owl eyes and extending our peripheral view is really useful after being on a screen, which sends our vision this way. To actually send your vision out is a really useful actually just physically for your eyes. It's really beneficial, let alone for your whole perspective on life as well. So those would be the ways to start just building a bit of rhythm and balance between those phases.
Thank you, Looby. And so we are open for questions or comments. I don't see anything coming yet, but if anybody, we still have 10 more minutes. And well, one of the things that I would like to share is your courses. I know that you were doing your courses in person, and I think you came back to in-person courses just this month, right, or last month.
Yes.
And yeah, those were amazing. I remember when I took the course with you and finally met you. So do you also offer courses online?
I do, yeah. So I've just done one in-person course in the last 2 years. So, but most of the time I've been working online and finding them really nourishing experiences to build the global cultural emergence community as well. So that I have different courses relating to the different phases as well. So the one that's currently up at the moment is the Activating Cultural Emergence one, which we've just started, but there's just time to slip in if you want to enroll on that one. And then next month we'll do the Cultural Emergence Design course, which is the one you took in Canada when I came over, and where people create designs for themselves using the design web. And the next year we'll do the Peace one, which is about connection practices in the spring. So yeah, I'm finding it's interesting, and I think I'm sure you have this on your online courses as well, how much connection and inspiration and community you can build online.
Yes.
And that actually as well, what I've found is from doing online courses is that there's actually a different feedback loop in people's lives. So it's like I get this bit of information, and then I'm suddenly able to observe these patterns here, because I'm like, it's like building a book, a bookcase, and I'm actually building the bookcase in the room that it's going to go in, rather than going away to a course and building a bookcase and then having to home. So there's a different, so they have benefit.
Yeah.
Have you found?
It has a different, it has a different thing. Like, if, for example, the people who take the EDEs, which are all in person usually in Gaia Education, the EDEs, the education, education for the no, well, I don't remember the name of the EDE, sorry, but they are for education and design of sustainability, but they are in person, and they are very, very, inspiring, and they have this pattern disruption, which is when you have to travel to a course, you have to sit in the course, and the whole culture around you is very different from the one that you are aware in your life. But then, like you say, you come back to your life and there's this shock, and not necessarily you are prepared to start making those changes. And in online, it happens right away, because you receive it, but you are still in your culture, so you can start implementing that. We do receive the same a very similar feedback, and actually very inspiring feedback for, from people who finished the courses, and how the things have changed for them, after attending the courses, even when they are online. So yes, I am aware of that. So thank you for sharing. Okay, so I don't see really a lot of questions, but I would like to say
There is a
uh,
question. There's a
there's a
question.
question. Oh, yeah, how to bring the face of challenge and awaken into your communities or groups where people are completely new to cultural emergence. Yeah, that's a good one. Like if they're not familiar with the concepts or the processes or the routines, right? How you can bring that,
Yeah.
and be efficient.
Yeah, so I would say to the challenge and awaken phase, when you're trying to do that for someone else, to go gently with it, and to small doses, and to open them up to the ideas slowly, rather than like, "Wah," here we go. So that is one of the phases, I think, to go slowly when you're working with other people. And I think the nourish and empower is about where people are at. So first of all, to establish where they're at, because if someone is already, or group is already, maxed out on the challenge and awaken, then adding more will be counterproductive. But maybe they're ready for it. Maybe they're ready for, they're sort of like sensing that there is a kind of shake up needed, and that there's something that they're not seeing, so, and that they're wanting that reflection and that awareness and perspective being brought to them. So it's about observing and being appropriate to the situation. And I think the nourish and empower phase is always a really good place to start with people. Start with listening to them, start with connecting with them, start with catching their stories, and from that then you can observe and
Yeah.
trust, and then find the ways to go forward from that.
Yeah. Thank you for that, because I think one of the things that we have a lot of, even in the permaculture and sustainability movements, or ecosystem restoration movements, is that people still carry the old patterns from the old culture. And starting with that nourishment and empowering, I think is a good point. Sometimes we want to just come in and shake everything and change everything around, but it doesn't work.
Yeah,
Well,
definitely. And we are all definitely carrying patterns from the cultures we're a part of, which is why the permaculture movement in the UK is different from the permaculture movement in Canada, which is different from the permaculture movement in India, because we're all part of that. There's osmosis between cultures there that's happening. And to be aware of that as well, and not to be, I think there's a lot of people that might be like, well, there's no racism or sexism or oppression or privilege in permaculture, and it's, well, that's there's bound to be, isn't there? Let's name it and acknowledge it and try and work through it, rather than ignore it and deny it.
Yeah, so there is a last question before we close, from Fernanda. I don't know if you can see that.
I can, yes. Great question. The most difficult challenges for empowering women. That's a great question, and it sort of leads on from what I was just saying about how, that cultures of male oppression or disempowerment of women comes from both directions. That's part of the picture there, isn't it? So it's the most difficult challenges for empowering women, I would say, is quite context specific in different countries. So I think in the UK, it's more around opportunities for work, for how do we juggle our childcare and our work, and how do we and there's a lot of challenges there from things being repressed. So it's like, no, we're past that stage now. There isn't sexism now. There isn't inequalities now. You're free to do what you want. It's and so a bit of a denial that's going on. So there's unseen patterns that are still operating, that are disempowering us or blocking us from being empowered, but they're being denied. Whereas in other countries, there may be a bit.
Maybe even the beliefs that women have about themselves, and what they are supposed or not supposed to do or be. So it's different in every context.
And I think for it, there's a whole ancestral and historical context around empowering women, around, do we feel safe in our bodies? And actually most women on the planet still don't feel safe in their bodies at all times. There are luckily places we can feel safe, but there's also many situations where we don't, and that has a lineage there beyond our lifetime. And so it's then also, how do we deal with that and that process that ancestral trauma without passing it on, while still acknowledging that there is some sense in not feeling safe, because then we are able to protect ourselves from situations that can come up. So that's quite a big question there.
So we're gonna close with this one, Looby. I mean, we are starting to receive a lot of interesting questions and comments, but we also want to respect the time of the people. So let's close with this one, and then next questions. Remember, everybody attending to this, that this is recorded, so you will be able to watch it. And we also offer a forum in the website where this is going to be, meaning that you can also ask questions there, continue the conversation. Both Looby and I will take care of the checking the forum next week, so you can continue posting questions there. Looby.
What top 3 community activities can we do to start cultural emergence on a local level? So I guess it's like how do we weave that local level so that we start to feel part of a community, and so how to start sensing that community, that system, so that we are able to see the connections and make the connections and allow for that weaving to happen. That might be one of the community activities. I think the other would be around listening, and to be aware of who's on the margins of your community as well. So the margins of elders, of children, of minorities, of who's on the edges, and how can we allow them a bit more voice in the community as well. So just starting to engage and listen to them, would be. Not sure about the third one really that's coming to my mind, apart from just listening. Listening is, I'd repeat the one around listening, actually.
I find that food is one thing that in almost every community opens the doors. So if you start we call here in Canada potluck, when everybody brings their food, and more if you have people from different places in the world, that really opens the conversation and a space for people to feel welcome, and where you can start listening, like Looby said. So food could be, could be one of the first ones.
Definitely, and showing appreciation for the place you live as well. That's to just when you meet people at the bus stop, just appreciate the weather, appreciate that there are buses, whatever you can appreciate. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you, Sylvia, for the talk today. It's been lovely.
So thank you, Looby, for your presence here, for all the work that you are doing in the world, for all the courses that you offer, the beautiful books, and for being, able and accept this challenge of, being there, because it's a challenge, but at the same time, it's a huge opportunity, the life, has given to you, and you are giving to so many others. I also want to remind everybody of the connections between Looby's work and what we are doing in Gaia Education, and this is one of the reasons that we invited her, to this series of master classes. And there are many connections between Looby's courses and the courses that we have, for example, in the social dimension. We actually mentioned her book in the course. So we want to give you all a gift, both from Looby and from Gaia Education. Those of you who register and attended this presentation today will have a 15% of discount over any one of the courses in Gaia Education. Whatever is showing in the website, it's another 15%. And also Looby has a special link for her courses. And so everything is going to be shared in a follow-up email that you will be receiving tomorrow and then on Friday again.
Lovely. Yeah, thank you. I'd just like to share, if people want to sign up to my newsletter, you get a free ebook of the 7 ways to think differently. So, and then you'll stay in the loop, and there's lots of other podcasts and videos on there. And tomorrow is the last sign-up day for the Activating Cultural Emergence course, because we've got our first group call tomorrow. So if you want to jump in for that, please do. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Looby, and there are many comments of appreciation and thank you coming. So thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.